Hey, it's Joe Solari here with the Business of Writing, and today we have special guest Jamie Davis, and we're going to talk about his business and specifically about audiobooks. How you doing, Jamie?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It's kind of fun to talk about the business side of things for a change.
Yeah, that's our gig here, and running into you at different shows, we've always had a chance to talk. We've never really had an opportunity like this to go into what you're doing, but I've been kind of lurking and watching what you've been doing around audiobooks, and I think it's really exciting, and people need to understand kind of the pioneering work you're doing, and maybe follow what you're doing if it fits with their business. So why don't we get started? Why don't you tell a little bit about like what you write and kind of the before you really understood what you could do with audiobooks?
Well, I'm a mostly fantasy author. I dabble a little bit in dystopian sci-fi, but most of my books are fantasy of one brand or another. And so my brand, I always tell people I write fun fantasy reads. If you like a fun kind of light fantasy book, I don't tend to get too dark in what I write. I think that's because of my background as a paramedic and a nurse. So I want to lift people up rather than put them in a mood.
Yeah, yeah.
But so that's the books I write. And up to that point, before I started getting into audio, I had a pretty successful run in my ebooks and have been pretty successful in selling books. I have about 30 books published at this point. And I'm on target to put out another, I guess, probably 4 at the end of this year.
Okay. And are those all self-published, or did you do any traditional publishing? Kind of how did you kind of come into?
I'm all self-published. I've been an entrepreneur all my life, really. And so when I started looking at getting into publishing originally, I kind of gravitated, I think, naturally towards looking how I could do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that there was a way to get into Kindle books. And so when I started digging into it and realized what that kind of opportunities were out there, I realized that it was probably a good fit for me because I get to keep all my rights. I get to, I get to control the pricing and get to control everything. And that appealed to me as an entrepreneur greatly.
And what year was that?
2014.
Okay. And had you been writing earlier, or like what got you?
Well,
when were you bitten by the bug?
Well, I've been a journalist for a long time in the healthcare space.
Okay.
I've got a variety of podcasts out there since 2005, and so I've been covering nursing conferences, medical conferences, emergency medicine conferences for a long time, and just kind of recently scaled that business back to concentrate on my writing. But back in 2014, someone heard me telling a story. I thought, ambulance paramedics tell great stories because we have great stories to tell. And I was telling somebody a story, and they're like, they said, "You ever heard of NaNoWriMo? I dare you. You should go write a book in a month." And I was like, never one to turn down a dare. I looked into it, said, well, this shouldn't be too hard. If you set a goal and you strive to do it, how hard can it be to write 1,300 words a day? So that's what I did. And I was successful. And the first draft of my initial book was completed in that first NaNoWriMo that year. And so that's kind of how I got bitten by the bug, because I really enjoyed it. It was a story about a paramedic, go figure, who treats supernatural creatures in the back of his ambulance, and the antics and hijinks that come from that. So that became my flagship series, actually, for a long time. I still put out about a book a year in that series at this point. Still to this day.
Mm-hmm. And how many books are in that series now? And I've actually read that.
Seven in the series now. I'm going to be putting out book 8 probably early in 2020. It's it's just fun. It's a fun series to write. There's never any shortage of fun things to bring into the crossover between supernatural creatures and their medical issues.
Mm. Well, and that's one of the interesting things about when I was reading your books is like you can tell, like, you know, you've got the real experience, right? You kind of get a little procedural in there, like, so people that are into that kind of thing, wondering like how paramedics think. There's that, you know, okay, here's what we think the problem is. We got to diagnose it. We've got to treat it. Right? It's pretty cool, right? And I'm assuming a lot of your supernatural characters are takeoffs of real calls you've been on.
Well, yeah, in a conglomerate sense. You know, none of them represent an actual patient, but really a collection of patients of a certain type. Mm-hmm. I mean, I got the idea for this story, you know, at 2 a.m. after taking a particularly scruffy person to the hospital and joking with my driver that, you know, that guy looked like a werewolf. And then I went, wow, wouldn't that be fun if we were all along, we've been treating people that were supernatural and we didn't even realize it. And that's how the story came about, really.
Yeah, that's great. So I know you've always, like you said, you've been entrepreneurial. What's your take that, you know, a lot of times we hear in these different groups, like, you know, treat your writing like a business. And I ask this question because a lot of authors aren't really sure. So I just want to get kind of your take on what that means to you, to treat your writing like a business.
I've treated my writing like a business from the beginning, I think. You know, I was in business at the time, so I just put it out underneath as another kind of arm of my Medicast productions business, my podcasts. And what I was surprised by was how many of my podcast audience, who are all healthcare professionals of one sort or another, really fell in love with these stories. And so I was able to springboard from my existing audience into bringing over those who were readers into a new list. And I immediately saw the benefit of that, and they were clamoring for more. And so I realized that there was an income stream for my business, and always one to never sit on a one-legged stool. I always try to have additional stools holding that, you know, seat up. And so another income stream is always appealing to me. I think that's why audio appeals to me as much as it does. It's just another way to bring income from my books.
Sure. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about that? Like I said, I was lurking. I remember, I think you did a visit to Find Away Voices where you were kind of doing a behind the scenes, and that was probably early stages. But why don't you walk us through your journey of like how you got into it, how you're doing it, because it's a little bit different than a lot of other people. I think there's some lessons you can teach authors that are thinking about audio, how to do it in an efficient way. So,
okay, yeah. So I think it was back at the end of 2017. I think I heard Kelly Lytle on Joanna Penn's podcast, I think might have been, talking about like Find Away Voices was like a month old at that point. The company Find Away has been around for a long time in the audiobook space, but Find Away Voices was their move into providing services for the indie marketplace. And so it really, again, because I'm independent by nature, it appealed to me to retain the rights. And I'd been approached by a couple of companies regarding my lit RPG fantasy series, and I had just never gotten back to getting around to returning those emails. Probably about a month after I'd gotten those initial emails, I heard this interview with Kelly, and I said, you know what, this is where I want to be. And I looked into it, tried to figure out and calculate the cost, and decided that it was an investment worth my time to at least put one book out there and see how it did. And my initial goal with that first book was to take my best-selling book and put it and create an audiobook from it, and then wait and see, not do any other production, but let it pay itself off. And when it paid itself off, I'd reinvest in another book. And that was my goal from the beginning. Was, you know, my wife's an avid audiobook listener.
Mm-hmm.
I do too, listen to not as many as she does, but she has an hour commute one way. So she gets through a lot of audiobooks in a month. And I knew there was a market for it. I knew the market was growing, although I didn't have any firm figures. It was more of an anecdotal feel that the market was growing. And so I kind of focused on that. And I was surprised, and this is my experience. I don't expect it to be everyone's experience, but my best-selling book earned back in about 7 weeks, 6 to 7 weeks,
that's
somewhere
great.
in there. It's about a 10-hour book, and it cost me about $1,500 to produce.
Okay.
So it earned back in 2 months or so of royalties, and I turned around and started the next book, the second book in that series, right away. And that one earned back a little faster because, of course, book one was still paying back, and book two. And so I kept doing that for that first year, for 2018, kind of ran through until I had 6 books out in that fantasy series, and they were earning really well. And then I went to 20 books in 2018 and saw the K-Lytics presentation, the brief K-Lytics presentation from Alex over there, and he just had like one line item on a chart he put up that just off to the side was audiobooks. And I think it was like 28% growth over the last year. And everybody else was looking at, ebooks and for their genres and everything else. And I'm looking over in the upper right-hand corner. I'm like, what does that say? Does that say audiobooks 28%? And he just made a quick mention about it and then went back over to talk about the various hot-selling genres. And I went, that's what I want to do. That's growing better than anything out there right now.
I had him on
and so I decided at that point. Go ahead.
I had him on this show, and he has a slide. If you go back and look at it, it's crazy where he shows the change from year to year of the market share percentages, and audiobooks is just swamping everything. And I think the thing to understand about that, and kind of digging into it, it's not cannibalizing sales. The whole market is getting bigger. Those are people that don't read. The majority of people that are signing up for things like Audible, they don't read. This is a new market of people that are digesting your content when they can, like your wife, right? It's not like she sits down and just meditates and reads. It's like it's something to do while she's exercising or commuting, or understanding that that's a way to get your content into those people and build them into your fan base, I think is widely lost on a lot of authors.
Yeah, and she's a perfect example of this because she actually has a separate book on her Kindle. She doesn't go back and forth with the same book. She has a different book she's Kindle reading.
That's how I do it.
And she's listening to something completely different in the car. And so she's not cannibalizing sales. She's reading twice as many books. And I think that your point is well taken. And so, I made that decision at 20 books last year in November that 2019, I was going to double down on my audio, and just every cent of anything I made in audiobooks was going immediately back into audiobook production. So that, now at this point, I have 2 books in production pretty much almost the whole year. So by the end of the year, I should have most of my back catalog out, as well as my newly published books soon to be out, if not out at the same time that they're released.
Okay. So that's part of what you're hoping to get to, is where you can release audio and print at the same time?
Yeah, and I'll tell you why I do that. Print, ebook, audiobook, all at the same time, because you get that, especially in Amazon, you get that Amazon bump for that first 30 days where your book is more visible. If you have your print book there, you sell more print books. If you have your audiobook link there to Audible, guess what? You sell more audiobooks because you're more visible. And so some of those people that see your book are audiobook listeners too, or audiobook listeners only. Mm-hmm. And they will, there's a certain amount of extra click-through you're getting. Push for, let Amazon work for you, I say. Mm-hmm.
Well, and a little inside baseball, I was talking with a guy at Audible Studios, and they're really aggressive trying to get licensing of authors. One of the deals that one of the terms of the deal is that you hold off your new releases to when they're going to be ready to release the audiobook. So they understand the power of that. And if they get it, then, us indies should be, using that to our advantage too.
Absolutely. And it's good to hear that. I hadn't heard that. So that's a nice thing to know that I'm thinking in the right direction there. And it just takes a little bit. You just got to hold on to it for about an extra 6 to 8 weeks is what I've found. If you're planning ahead and you've got your narrators lined up and your book production is going to be, you can kind of have them ready to go when you get that book back from the editor. And then it's just a question of waiting that 6 to 8 week time frame to get them to finish the book, to get it proofed, to have them go back and fix anything that needs to be fixed, and then get that final version uploaded and into the stores.
Well, and in some respects, it kind of acts as another proofing process, right?
Oh, it absolutely does. I find stuff that the editors and the proofreaders miss all the time when I'm going through the audiobook production proofing. Although I'm starting to outsource that because I'm trying, it's starting to with 2 books in production all the time. It's, it's taking 20 hours out of, my month every month or so. And it's just time that I don't have to give up. So I'm starting to outsource that. But they are going through the PDF while they're reading along with the narrator, and they're marking typos and then sending me not only the list of corrections for the narrator, because I then go through and I double check all the corrections. Some of the stuff that they hear, I am okay with. I don't, sometimes the narrator does it better than I wrote it, and I'm okay with them switching out a word or putting word over the other one, and that's I'll let them have that poetic license with their performance. But I do also make those typo corrections along the way.
Yeah. So a little of a side, like now that you've heard narrators narrating your book, has it changed how you write your books?
A little bit. I'm a little bit, and it's driving my one of my editors a little nuts because I'm a little freer with my commas. I think I'm hearing some of my narrators speak my words, and I'm hearing those performance pauses that they put in, and I'm trying to direct that a little bit more with the way I write the book. And so there's some of that. The other thing is, and I'll just, for those that have never heard one of their books in audiobook before, I will just say, for me, it is a great joy to hear something I've written performed back to me in that way. It is kind of like an out-of-body author experience because I listen to the story and don't really think of it as something I wrote. It's a different kind of way to experience the book, and I hear things that I never intended, or I didn't, at least consciously intend to write into the story, but this person interpreted it in a way that brought out some feature or some emotion that I hadn't really thought about until they brought it forward for me.
So do you just use one narrator? Do you have different narrators for different series? Kind of how'd you go about the process of picking talent?
I highly recommend getting a narrator and locking them down for your series. The same narrator for the whole series, if it's going to be the same voice in that series. Some people have different characters coming up in different parts of the series, and then it makes sense to have maybe a different narrator for a female character versus a male character. But really, to have the same narrator is important for across the series. People expect that in the book marketplace and the audiobook marketplace, and they get annoyed if it changes narrators midstream for no good reason. If, like I said, if your main character switches from a male main character to a female main character for a section of the story, or for one book, one whole book, let's say, then it makes sense to maybe switch to a different narrator for that book. But for the most part, keep the same narrator for the series. Then, but I do use different narrators for different series. I have different characters, so they don't all sound the same. I have reused narrators across a couple series because I just felt like they were a good fit for the other series. They had enough range in their performance that they could voice the characters differently. They wouldn't just sound like the same characters from the other book. So I've done that. I have worked with 4 narrators now, across 6 series. So, and I've been pretty pleased with the results for the most part. And it's just a question of kind of auditioning them and producing the process properly, which is something that I think scares a lot of authors, because you do have to be able to say, hey, you mispronounced this word, or you didn't get this quite right. I need you to fix this section. You got the voice wrong, or your accent changes halfway through the book. Can't do that. Go back and fix the second half of the book. And that can happen. So I think it's something that a lot of authors, because a lot of authors are introverts, are avoiding that confrontation or worry about it. But you'll find, and what I found talking both myself and to other authors that have done the process, narrators are happy to fix stuff. They want to get it right. This is their job. This is their performance is important to them, and they want to make sure the performance meets your expectations. So I've not heard really of any super horror stories regarding that part of the process. So people should, find a professional to do the job, and then, trust in them to be professional when you give them feedback.
Yeah. In my experience with narrators is that, they're in a similar kind of boat as self-publishing authors. They're trying to do a business based on their talent, right? They've had this great opportunity now that, it used to be really tough to get, acting jobs, just voice acting jobs, like maybe a commercial here, voice over there. But now with the need, the ones that are embracing book narration are really trying to build a business. So they're investing in great studios in their house, and they're really focused on making sure that you're a happy customer, because they know that if they can get a good series, that, it could be, in your case, you have 7 books, and you said $1,500 each. It's
not cheap. I'm not going to worry about it. And I think that this is where it comes into that making that business decision for your business, and understanding both how your business is set up and understanding your comfort level with doing certain things in your business. Some people are just happier being in a traditional publishing system, and that is the same for those that get into the audiobook side of things. They're just as happy to let somebody else take over the headaches for a lesser share of their royalties. And that's a decision, everybody has to make based on their own business model and where they are. I've chosen to for my business to invest in my books so that I can keep the largest portion of my rights and royalties and everything else. But that's something everybody has to come up with themselves. It's not cheap to do this. But I also I said, look, I can invest $1,500 in my business, and then I can wait until I earn it back. And I was lucky enough to have it earned back relatively quickly, and was able to start funneling it back into the system a little more each time. That's why I suggest always to people, pick your best-selling book, because if it's selling well in ebook and paperback, it's probably going to sell well as an audiobook too, if you get the right narrator and lock it down and get it done well.
Have you seen your narration costs go up over time?
Yeah, they've gone up a little bit. The narrators I started with, the 2 narrators, the male and female narrators that I started with from a couple of my series, have graciously kept their rates where we started. And I'm not adverse to them raising their rates. I think they're worth it, but I'm happy that they haven't yet. But yeah, the other narrators, as I've added more narrators into the process, it's probably gone up about 25, maybe 30%.
Yeah, I've had some authors tell me, especially ones that kind of got early in certain genres, where they may have been early in the career of a particular narrator that became kind of a voice to a genre. It's like, now the guy's it's not that I'm not prepared to pay the money. It's I can't even get on a schedule.
Yeah.
That's how busy some of these guys are getting and women are getting with their narration. They spend a lot of
I
time.
mean, I'm booking people 6 months out now. You know, I think that's not unusual. Like there's a bit of a rush from people who've recognized the market's a good market to be in, and so they're booking the good narrators ahead of time. I will, you know, a little tip for folks. If you're willing to be a little more hands-on with your production, if you're willing to write a really good note for the narrator that describes your characters, describes the feel you want, and all those things that you want to portray in your book, you can get a sort of a beginner narrator, somebody who's more new to the marketplace, and get a good bang for your buck. Listen to their voice. If you hear that their voice is good for the part and they can manage the roles, the various roles in your story, they might just need somebody to kind of produce it for them, to be that director and handhold them a little bit to get it just the way you want. And you can get somebody a little bit cheaper that way. And so it's really, you know, if you're willing to put that time in, or you have somebody, you know, a spouse or a business partner or somebody you trust that you've hired, like a good assistant who's willing to do that, you can get a good narrator, or get a good performance out of a narrator that's a little less expensive than some of the others.
So, and when you were looking for talent, how did you go through that process, and where did you look? And
two different ways. I'm in a lot of author groups, and you'll find that there's a lot of narrators in the author groups now. Some more so than others. So if you search around, you'll find them. So every time I see a new narrator's name pop up, or see somebody pop up in my social media feed that's a narrator, I immediately go to their website and listen to their samples, and just kind of get a sense for what they sound like, thinking in terms of a book I have coming out. What would they fit for that character and that story? And then I kind of file it away and keep it. So that's one way to find them. Another way, and I have done this and been very happy with it as well. I've gone through Findaway Voices. They have a casting process that I think is pretty decent. They actually curate the narrators that come into their system. This is something I actually traveled to their offices in Ohio, because my daughter happens to be going to college like 45 minutes away from them. So when I found out where they were located, I planned a trip out to visit her, and also planned a lunch up there, and got some really good insights into their business and how they operate. And one of the things I really enjoyed was talking to Rin, who is the casting director. And she brings in every narrator and kind of has this spreadsheet where she lists out all the properties that she associates with that narrator. And then when you answer your questionnaire to bring your book into their system, it pops up stuff and gives her some keywords to search for. And then she selects 5 or 6 narrators for you to audition, which makes it a little bit easier. At least you're getting a starting point. You know, they're vetted. She usually, you know, there's a place where you can decide, you know, if you're price conscious, she'll select several lower price narrators, as well as she always throws in a higher price narrator. And I think she does that for contrast, because they do sound a little bit better, either because their studio's a better setup, they have a better mic. There are a couple of different things that could be accounting for that, not just their performance itself. But they curate the process. If the first selection of narrators aren't a good fit, they'll ask you what's different and what's wrong with the ones that they selected, so they can go back and make a better selection, and they'll give you another 5 or 6 narrators. So it's a process that's easy to go through. Once you've selected the narrator based on their samples, or selected 2 or 3, then you have them read samples of your book and follow the notes that you give them, so that they can perform part of your book back to you. And that's where you really get the gold, because that's where you start to hear your book come to life. And it's always very easy for me to pick in that system, because once I've got 2 or 3 narrators reading something that I've written, the cream always pops to the top for me. The one that really clicks is definitely the one when I hear them. And then you move forward with their process. Now, you know, Findaway does charge a fee to manage the production process. It's like 30%. 15 to 30%. I'm not exactly sure the exact total there, so I don't want to quote that if I'm wrong. But there is a fee associated with them casting, managing the production process throughout the process, keeping you in touch with the narrator. You use their dashboard to communicate. You use their dashboard to listen to the files, all that stuff. You can do it on your own and save a little money. But I think for the beginning person in audiobooks, I think it's a great system to work through. And that hand-holding can be very helpful, at least on your first couple of projects.
Mm. Yeah, I use them with the project that I did. And, what was interesting when I got to that point with the talent, there was two women that read my book. I liked one, my wife and kids liked another. And so what I did is I put those samples out in a survey to my readers. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch who came back and were like, audiobooks are evil, don't do audiobooks. But there was a lot of people, and they're not the audience, right?
Well, that's just it. I mean, they're not going to listen to it anyway. So, yeah. Okay, that's fine.
So okay, thanks for writing, but I don't care. But then there was a bunch of people that I really like this person. And it wasn't the one I picked, right? So it's that's the other thing is engaging with your readers, because there's this collective knowledge out there of how they're imagining the different characters. And I know that there's been some instances of authors where by picking the wrong narrator, and the audience is like, that is not what I expected that character to sound like. And so you got to make sure that experience is right for them. But the other thing about Findaway is I do think that they've got a really good process for helping you walk through that, right? It's not just here's the dashboard, go through it. It's here's how you do it. You're going to do this step, then you do this, then you do this. And yeah, I can't remember what the fee is, but it wasn't outlandish.
No, it wasn't. There's a $49 fee to load your book into the system. And then if you're going to use the narrator, their casting process and their dashboard, then there's a additional, it's tacked onto the hourly rate, per finished hour rate. And it's not like you said, it's not outlandish. And because they really walk you through the process, I think it's well worth it, especially for a person newer to the marketplace. They send regular emails as each part of the process comes along, explaining what's next, explaining what to do. They have a great template for writing notes to your narrator in the beginning to help explain your characters and explain your world and explain everything that's going on in the story to them. Commonly mispronounced words from your books, especially in fantasy. We all come up with funky names with 6 consonants in a row, and how are you supposed to pronounce that? And so it's important to have that process out there. And I think that they do a good job of setting it up for people. Plus they have the whole wide distribution thing.
Yeah, that was where I was going. Is you're using them for distribution?
Yeah, I am. And I think this has kind of been my pet peeve for the last 6 months or so, is that a lot of people are assuming that Audible has the same stranglehold on the audiobook marketplace that Amazon has on the ebook marketplace. And they just don't. Amazon, depending on who you talk to, 85, 90% of the market share is Amazon in the ebook market. And so it makes sense to be exclusive for some people in Amazon. I don't think it makes as much sense for Audible. And the difference in ratio is 40% royalty versus 25% royalty if you're non-exclusive. But there are 32 other stores out there right now, including the library marketplace, which gets none of the Audible exclusive books. So if library customers are hungry and it's not giving away free books, which is the genius of the audiobook system for libraries out there, it is pay per checkout. Every time somebody checks out your book, a little cash register goes off in my head. And it's become my biggest single portion of the audiobook marketplace income for me has come from library share,
Wow.
which surprised the heck out of me. Now, once I started seeing that number tick up, I started marketing to the libraries, to the library customer. And I did that by just hitting my list and saying, aren't audiobooks expensive? Did you know you can get all my audiobooks for free at your local library? And here's the even better part. You get it for free, and I still get paid every time someone checks out my book. And it's a win-win. And so about once a month, I talk about my audiobooks in my newsletter, and I remind people, hey, if you can't afford to pay for it, you can get it for free at your local library. And I keep driving those library sales. And I make far and above what I make on ACX on the wide marketplace. So it's not even a competition in my eyes, at least in my experience.
No, I concur. From what I've seen, I don't have nearly the presence you do, but the books that I have I do find a way also. Right off the bat, the minute the books were up, like I was starting to see those library sales. And, when you start to understand how pricing works in audiobooks, that, just because you set a list price at a certain list price doesn't mean that it's really honored by Google Play or Apple or Audible. They're going to decide what your book's going to be. I know a lot of authors that were surprised by what they actually make in Audible on their books. It wasn't what they thought it was going to be, even at the 40%.
Right. And that's the thing. And the other thing in library is there's a couple of Findaway has an instant reporting system. So they report sales on a daily basis back from some of their retailers. For me, the biggest library seller is the one called Hoopla. And that's a paper checkout system. And they run about 45 days behind. They report monthly. So at around the end of the month to halfway through the next month, they'll report 2 months ago. And you get paid based on that. So they lag behind the rest of the market. So there are audiobook sales in libraries going on for people out there that they don't even see for the first 2 months. And that's important to remember that even though you might be seeing something in the Findaway dashboard, not all of their retailers report directly that way. They only report once a month. And so they don't get any sales information until you get your royalty check.
Yeah, that's something I'm still kind of getting my head around, because there'll be a big slug that comes through and it's 2 months ago.
Yeah, I just a couple of my books did huge sales in Central Europe. Not sure why. Had nothing to do with anything I did that I can tell. But just recently, I got a huge chunk in from a distributor called Storytel, which distributes in Europe and mostly Central Europe, so like Bulgaria and the Czech Republic, and I was just like, I have no idea. I mean, I know there's a lot of English speakers in Europe, and I think they're just enjoying the stories in English, but I think being wide is just there's so many people out there consuming audiobooks, even people that have English as a second language.
Well, that's the part of the being Americans, we tend to be a little self-centered and not think about how many more English, there's more college educated English speakers in India than there is human beings in the United States. Right.
Yeah. No, I mean, what's it, 600 million? Yeah. I think it's the number.
Yeah.
I mean, twice as many people are college educated English speakers in India than there are, in the United States population, which.
Yeah. Right. So that's going to, if you can write to that market and you can have audiobooks in that, it's going to be a big deal. Now it's an emerging market in a lot of ways, but the trends are there, right? What's making audiobooks such a big deal is the phone, right? It's people are carrying around this device that makes it easy for them to access audio content, right? And whether it's podcasts or listening to audiobooks, it's opening up these markets. I just had some friends over to the house. I was talking to this guy, and he's retired guy, very wealthy dude, done really well in his life. But he was explaining how he can read, but he doesn't read because he had this kind of thing happen when he was younger. And so he's got real trouble reading, but he's an avid audiobook listener. Like he just devours audiobooks all the time. He flies a lot, he drives a lot. So it's like, that's a guy that was never going to be your customer because he has some personal situation. But boom, like, and guess what? It can be, he's going to buy those books. Like he's going to pay full price. So, I mean, you can make a lot more in audiobooks than you can in an ebook.
Yeah, and I've been driving sales with Facebook ads to my audiobook box sets. 3 books and 3 books for 1 credit, 3 books in 1.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of headline appeals to those audiobook readers, and they're looking for that kind of a bargain. You get 30 hours of listening out of one subscription credit or whatever the case may be. And so they're doing very well for me. So it's a good market. I'm like I said, I doubled down for 2019. I guess I'm quadrupling down for 2020, because I think this is going to be continuing. I think we're going to see double-digit growth again the next year.
Yeah, I agree. I think that especially as some of these other players become options to folks in the United States other than Audible, right? I think that that's part of it too. Is just talking about something like Hoopla. Most people don't understand that you can load Hoopla on your phone and hook it up to your library and get access to, not just audiobooks, but ebooks and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, it's literally, once you got your library card, you never have to go back to the library. It's all through their website. So it's no different than getting a book from Audible or any other retailer, except it's free. Mm-hmm. And you just load it onto your phone using the Hoopla app. It plays the same. It remembers where you are. You can jump chapters. You can do all that stuff inside the Hoopla app, just like you can do in any other listening app for audiobooks. So it's a great resource.
Now, I know you were got early access to Findaway Voices Direct, Authors Direct.
Yes.
How's that been for you?
It's been great for a lot of reasons, but I haven't leveraged it well. I just haven't gotten around to working that into my marketing plan. Mm-hmm. And it's got an I've sold books there. I make 85% roughly of what my book royalty is set at. So I can price under the market and still make more money on my books. And so I make money there. I just haven't, there's so many things we could be doing to market. And I just haven't cracked that nut yet. And it's not because it's probably not very easy. It's probably easy to do. I just haven't gotten around to it. I will say it's super easy from the standpoint of giving out review copies or prize copies. I've been using audiobook giveaways using my Authors Direct page on a lot of cross promotions for my book launches. So that's been really successful. If you go through Findaway and you go through Findaway's exclusive system, which is really basically they just distribute everything for you everywhere. Yeah. You get 100 copy codes of your audiobook. So you got 100 distinct codes to give out for every audiobook you produce that way. I'm still not up to 20 on any of them. So, there's plenty of free audiobooks out there. You can also price your books in there for free. So if you want to put your first in series at free in your store and tell people, go try my books out, and then remind them they can go back and get the other books for less than a credit on their Audible account. A lot of people will shop that way. And like I said, it's going to be easy to market to that store. I just haven't really focused on it yet.
Yeah. I certainly you can, from when I talked to Will, it was their philosophy is like, here it is. It's up to you to do the marketing. They're not doing any marketing at all. It's for you to do. Now I've talked to him. They're using Shopify for their infrastructure. So that's real interesting to me. I don't know how it works because they're aggregating all those sales, but Shopify is really focused on kind of this, e-commerce 2.0, or maybe it's 3.0. I don't know what number we're at now, but like if you have your own Shopify situation, you can actually see a sales conversion when you do Facebook advertising.
Okay.
You can actually sell on Pinterest. You can sell inside Messenger. Like they're really focusing on making, e-commerce ubiquitous. And so I'm sure since they have that infrastructure, they're going to start having some other features that'll start.
And it's a beta program. I completely understand that. It would be great. I think I would be much quicker to market to it if I could put my Facebook pixel on my store, and then be able to really track those conversions, like you said. I think it is a beta product, and I think that there's going to be additional functionality coming. I know like I said earlier, they and everybody else are going through some growing pains right now, because a lot of people are trying to get audiobooks produced. And so I'm sure this part of their business is it's kind of on the back burner a little bit. I don't know that for sure, but I would do it that way because I'd have to have all hands on deck to get the books out.
Yeah. That's where people are making phone calls, right? I got to get my book out. Well, it's been great having you on. You want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff you've got coming up? I know that you're looking to help some authors with some information around audiobooks.
Yeah, the word got out that I doubled down for 2019, and a lot of my author friends have been reaching out to me with questions about audiobook production, and I've been answering a lot of questions by email, by phone call, and I always try to be outgoing and helpful to people. But at least 10 of them have told me, you need to write this down and put it out in a book because this is great information. And I appreciate that I'm able to help them that way. So I've finally decided, okay, after the 10th person told me that I'm trying to cobble all that together, had an outline pretty much locked down. I've talked to some authors and finalized, what structure needs to be in the order of how it goes. I'm not just going to focus on indie production alone. I will talk a little bit in there about getting your book produced through Tantor or Podium or any of the traditional audiobook publishers. But it will be mostly about my journey to create audiobooks myself. And if my journey can help anybody out there, I'm more than happy to share what I've learned in this upcoming book. It should be out. I'm trying to get it out by mid-November, so it's out in time for the 20 Books conference coming up. Definitely, it'll be out by the end of the year.
Right. And you'll be at 20 Books?
I will be at 20 Books. Folks can find me at 20 Books, and I'm happy to meet people. I'm one of the team leaders for the AV crew, so I'll be front and center. If you find the camera that's recording the live stream, if I'm not there, they'll know where I am.
Yeah, and grab you in the hall because I know you'll be rushing around from room to room. And
but I'm happy to chat with folks and meet people. If we can't talk, then I'm happy to exchange cards and catch up with people after the conference.
Great. Well, it's good having you on, Jamie. And
thank you, Joe.
I'll see you in Las Vegas in what?
Not
months?
Too long.
Yeah, it's right around the corner. All right. See you later.
Take care.
All right.